If you think you know what pain is, stop and listen to my story, because sometimes the deepest wounds don't bleed, they stay hidden. And I carried mine in silence for more than 50 years. My name is Ana Ribeiro. I'm 70 years old. Now, I'm sitting here on the old wooden porch of my house in Monte Claro, South Carolina. It's July, and the sun is setting slow and heavy. The breeze carries that soft scent of magnolia and dust, and the creaking of the floorboards beneath my chair reminds me I'm still alive, alive after everything, alive even after being broken and silenced. This porch used to be my hiding place. When I was a little girl, I'd sit out here with my legs dangling, too short to touch the floor, and stare out at the trees, wondering why the world around me felt so wrong. I remember the scent of pine from the woods behind our house, the way the wind would rush through them, but inside the house, there was no wind, no movement, only shadows and silence, and fear. I was born in 1955, right here in Monte Claro. My father, Carlos Ribeiro, worked at a paper mill. He was a hard man, the kind who believed boys were a blessing and girls were burdens. My mother Teresa was quiet and tired, always shrinking into the background. She was the kind of woman whose hands never stopped trembling, even when she smiled. Then there was my brother, Rafael, 7 years older than me. Everyone loved him. The neighbors, the teachers, even the pastor at church. They all said Rafael was charming, smart, respectful. But they didn't see what I saw. They didn't hear what I heard at night when the house went quiet. It started when I was 9. At first it was little things, a hand on my shoulder that lingered too long, a look that made me feel small and exposed. I didn't have words for it then. I just knew it felt wrong. And then, one night, he came into my room. I remember the way the floor creaked under his steps, how I held my breath and pressed myself against the wall, hoping maybe I could become invisible. But I couldn't, because monsters don't disappear when you close your eyes. My father ignored it, pretended not to see, and my mother, she saw everything, I'm sure, but she never said a word. Not once. The only time she ever came close to acknowledging it was one morning when she found me huddled on the bathroom floor, my knees drawn to my chest. She sat down beside me, touched my hair, and cried, but she didn't speak. That silence was the loudest sound of my childhood. For years, I lived as a ghost in that house, careful not to laugh too loud or cry too long. Because in that house, every emotion was dangerous. Every mistake was a reason to be punished. My body stopped feeling like mine. It belonged to him, to Raphael, and to the silence my parents wrapped me in. At 15, something changed. My stomach ached. My clothes stopped fitting. And then I missed a month. Then 2. At 16, I realized I was pregnant. My heart stopped the moment I felt the baby move inside me, because I knew who the father was. And I also knew no one would believe me. Or worse, they would, and still do nothing. When my mother found out, she broke down. She kept whispering, "What are we going to do?" But we both knew the answer, nothing. Because my father ruled our home with an iron fist. When the truth came out, Raphael told a lie, that a boy from town, a poor boy named John, had seduced me. My father believed him without hesitation. He went to John's house, screamed in the street, and within a week, John and his family were gone, disgraced, banished, and me, I was left with shame, with fear, and with a baby growing inside me. I gave birth in November of 1971. It was a difficult labor. There was no doctor, just a midwife my mother called in secret. When I held my son for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: love. Real, raw, unconditional love. I named him Lucas. He was mine, not Raphael's, not my father's, mine. But Raphael didn't see it that way. To him, Lucas was proof of his power. My father refused to even look at the child, and my mother, bless her soul, fed him in secret, and kept him warm at night when I couldn't stop crying. I tried to run, twice. I wrapped Lucas in a blanket, waited until everyone was asleep, and slipped out the back door. But both times, I was caught, dragged back, punished in silence. The bruises never showed where anyone could see, but they were there, always. Then, in October of 1972, something happened I wasn't expecting. My father had a heart attack and died, just like that. One moment he was shouting about something at dinner, the next he was on the floor, gasping. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anything at all. After that, Raphael took over the house, but without our father, something in him shifted. He became paranoid, more reckless, and that weakness gave me a window, a small, fragile chance to escape. I'll tell you how I did it, and how I saved my son, in time. But first, I need you to know this. For the first 16 years of my life, I wasn't living. I was surviving. And if you're out there now, listening to me, feeling trapped, silenced, or broken, please hear this from someone who's been through hell and crawled her way out. You are not alone. You can get out. You can survive. Asterisk. If this grandma's story is touching your heart, leave a like. It really helps the channel and shows that you want to hear more real stories like this. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next stories to come. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it. Sometimes, a simple story can change an entire day. Thank you for being here and listening with your heart. There's something I want you to understand before I go on. Survival isn't brave when it's the only thing you have. Back then, I didn't survive because I was strong. I survived because I had no other choice. After my father died, our home didn't get better, it just got quieter. Raphael didn't hit me, at least, not in ways that left bruises you could see. His power was more twisted than that. He knew how to control me with fear, with looks, with threats. He reminded me often, no one would ever believe you. You're nothing without this house, without me. But he didn't know that something inside me had started to shift. Lucas had changed me. That little boy with soft black curls and eyes too wise for a newborn. I'd hold him in the middle of the night when he cried, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. One day, baby, we'll be free, I swear. It was in the early fall of 1972 when I met Livia. She was a churchwoman, tall, kind, the type who brought pies to neighbors and always stayed behind after service to help clean. She noticed me, even when I tried to disappear. One Sunday, while I was rocking Lucas at the back pew, she sat beside me and said, "You don't have to carry that look in your eyes forever." I didn't answer. I couldn't, but I cried the whole walk home. Weeks passed before I spoke to her again, and when I did, it wasn't with words. I gave her a letter. Just a few scribbled sentences. "I need help. Please don't tell anyone." She read it, folded it slowly, and just nodded. "I know someone," she whispered. That someone was Mrs. Edna Mendez, a well-dressed white woman with strong perfume and even stronger opinions. She was the wife of a local councilman, which meant people listened when she spoke. I was terrified of her at first. She looked like everything I didn't trust: privilege, power, and too many secrets behind perfect smiles. But when she looked at Lucas and said, "That boy deserves a chance," something cracked in me. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Mrs. Mendez didn't ask for details. She didn't need them. "Some stories," she said, "you can hear in the silence between words." She gave me two things: money for a bus ticket and a note. That note was a recommendation for a job in Charlotte, North Carolina, housekeeping, at a boarding house on East 3rd Street. I waited 2 weeks. 2 weeks pretending everything was normal. 2 weeks folding Raphael's laundry with shaking hands. 2 weeks watching my mother avoid my eyes, though she knew something was coming. She never asked where I was going. But the night before I left, she walked into my room, kissed Lucas on the forehead, and said, "I hope you find peace, Anna." That was the only blessing she ever gave me. On the morning of November 15th, 1972, I left Monte Claro with a bag of clothes, $32, and Lucas wrapped in a quilt I stitched myself. The bus station smelled like oil and cheap coffee. My hands trembled as I handed the ticket to the driver. As the bus pulled away, I didn't look back. I was too afraid that if I saw that house one more time, I'd never be able to keep walking. Charlotte was noisy, fast, and strange. I'd never seen buildings so tall or people walking with so much purpose. I was a girl from a dusty town, carrying a baby and a bag full of pain. But I also carried something else, the tiniest seed of hope. The boarding house was run by a woman named Margaret, in her late 50s. She looked me up and down when I arrived. "You look like you've seen hell," she said. I nodded. "Well," she shrugged, "hell makes the best workers. Rooms upstairs. You start tomorrow." It wasn't glamorous. I scrubbed floors, washed sheets, cooked breakfast for 12 tenants, and kept Lucas close every second I could. But for the first time in my life, I slept without fear. Lucas laughed freely, and I learned how to breathe again. 3 years later, I met a man named Antonio, one of the boarders. A widower from Texas, kind eyes, quiet voice. He never asked about my past. He just brought me peaches from the market and told Lucas's bedtime stories. When he got sick in 78, he left us the house in his will. He said, "You turned this place into a home." I can't think of a better legacy. I changed my last name to Silva. I told people I was a widow. No one ever questioned me. I created a life from ashes. Lucas went on to study civil engineering. He married a beautiful woman named Mariana, and they had 2 children, Sofia, Clara, and Pedro. Antonio, I became a grandmother. I became safe, but I never told Lucas the truth, not once. Not because I'm ashamed of him, but because I love him too much to let that darkness touch him. He grew up whole, and that's all I ever wanted. Today, I speak, not because I need pity. I speak because I know someone is out there, right now, with a story they think no one will believe. Someone who thinks they're trapped forever. Let me be the voice that says, you can run, you can rebuild, you can become more than your pain. I did. And if this old woman could do it, so can you. So can you. There's something people don't tell you about trauma. It doesn't leave, it settles. Like dust in the corners of a house no one dares to clean. Even in Charlotte, even in a home that felt safe, I carried Monte Claro in my bones. I carried Raphael's shadow in the way I flinched at sudden noises. I carried my father's voice in the way I doubted every decision I made. Freedom didn't come all at once. It arrived in pieces, in the way I locked the door each night and finally believed no one would open it without permission, in the sound of Lucas's giggles as he ran through the kitchen, his little feet slapping against the tile, in the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings, when the world outside felt far away and unimportant, but healing. That was something else, entirely. I was 21 when Lucas asked me for the first time about his father. He was sitting on the floor, playing with a toy truck Antonio had given him, and he looked up at me with those big eyes and said, "Mommy, was Daddy nice?" It hit me like a punch to the chest. I could have lied. Said he died in the war. Said he was a hero, but I looked at my son and said the only thing I felt was true. He wasn't around, baby, but that's okay, because you are loved. He nodded, like it was enough. And I walked to the bathroom and cried in silence, biting my hand so Lucas wouldn't hear me. You see, there's a certain type of loneliness that never leaves survivors, the loneliness of not being believed, of being told to move on, of being treated like your pain is inconvenient. So we stay quiet, we bury the truth, and we smile, but inside, it festers. I worked at that boarding house for nearly 10 years. Every time a man walked in, I watched him, not because I wanted to, but because my body remembered the way trauma lives in your skin, in your reflexes. I'd fold sheets while listening for footsteps behind me. I'd check locks 3 times. I'd keep a knife in my apron pocket, even though I never admitted why. Antonio was the first man who didn't make me feel small. He'd leave books by the stairs for me, little things like The Grapes of Wrath or To Kill a Mockingbird. He never asked if I'd read them, just smiled when I put them back with a pressed flower between the pages. Once, I asked him, "Why do you leave those for me?" He shrugged and said, "Because every story deserves to be read by someone who understands it." That was the closest I ever came to telling someone what had happened to me. And he never pressed. God bless him for that. Still, even after Antonio passed and left us the house, I couldn't shake the fear. I kept Lucas close. Too close, maybe. I didn't let him sleep over at friends' houses. I walked him to school until he begged me to stop. I lived in constant fear that someone would hurt him the way I was hurt, that the cycle would repeat, that I would fail him. But he grew, he thrived. He became everything I prayed for, and still, I never told him. There were days I wanted to, days when he came home sad from school, and I wanted to show him that strength runs in our blood, that his mother wasn't weak, she was a survivor. But I couldn't, because how do you tell a child that his life began in violence? How do you give that burden to someone so full of light? I couldn't do it. Instead, I gave him stability. I gave him love. I celebrated every birthday, packed every lunch, and sat in the front row of every school play. I told him he was good, smart, worthy, the opposite of everything I was ever told, and I hoped that would be enough. Years passed. The boarding house became our home. Lucas went off to college. I stood at the station waving as his train disappeared, my heart bursting with pride and cracking with fear. I had never been apart from him, but he called me every Sunday, told me about lectures and professors, about a girl named Mariana who liked old movies and made him laugh. When he brought her home the first time, I was terrified she'd see through me, see the cracks in the story I had built, but she didn't. She hugged me like I was hers from the beginning. They married a year later. That night, after the wedding, I sat alone in the backyard with a cup of tea and the stars above me, and I thought, this is what healing looks like, not perfection, not forgetting, but watching the next chapter begin, and knowing you made it possible. But even then, I still had nightmares. I still woke up sweating. I still heard Raphael's voice sometimes, in the silence between breaths. Healing, I've learned, is not a destination. It's a decision you make every single day. Some days, you fail. Some days, you win. But you keep showing up, and now, here I am, 70 years old, sitting on this porch, watching my grandchildren chase lightning bugs across the yard, and thinking about all the versions of me that never got the chance to breathe this air, to feel this peace. That's why I'm telling this story. Because someone, somewhere, is still trapped in their own version of that house in Monte Claro, still believing no one will believe them, still thinking their voice doesn't matter, but it does. You do, and you're not alone anymore. Some days, I still wake up before the sun rises, not because I want to, but because my body never forgot what it was like to sleep in fear. Back then, mornings meant safety. Mornings meant I had made it through another night. Even now, I wake before the birds, sit in this old rocking chair on the porch, and hold my coffee like it's the only thing tethering me to the present. Silence, after all these years, is still both my comfort and my curse. You see, I never told Lucas the truth about his father, and I know, some people may say I should have, that the truth sets us free, but there are truths that don't set anyone free. There are truths that only shift the weight from one set of shoulders to another, and Lucas, he deserved better than that. He grew up in a home where no one raised their voice, where dinner was warm and served on time, where hugs were frequent and love was spoken out loud. He never had to hide in closets, never had to fear footsteps in the hallway. He laughed. He dreamed. He became someone I never thought could come from someone like me. But that doesn't mean the pain left me. I still jump when someone knocks unexpectedly at the door. I still sleep with the hallway light on. I still avoid the scent of my father's cologne, a strong mix of musk and tobacco that sometimes drifts in from strangers on the street and sends my stomach turning. Trauma doesn't die. It sleeps, maybe, but it wakes when you least expect it. Sometimes I ask myself, what would have happened if I had stayed? If I hadn't found Livia, if Mrs. Mendez hadn't cared? I think I would have disappeared, quietly, slowly, like so many women before me, women like my mother. Lord, that's a story I haven't spoken out loud in years. She wasn't a bad woman. She was just broken before she ever had a chance to be whole. She married young, to a man who believed his belt spoke louder than his words, and when Raphael started showing signs of that same cruelty, she flinched, but she didn't stop him. I used to be so angry at her, furious. How could she let it happen? How could she look away? But now, with gray in my hair and lines around my eyes, I understand something I didn't back then. Fear makes people freeze, and silence becomes the language of survival. She was a woman raised to believe obedience was godliness, that loyalty to her husband came before protection of her children. I don't forgive her, but I understand her. She was afraid, just like I was, just like so many still are. After I left, I sent her one letter, just one. I didn't say where I was. I only wrote, Mama, I made it out. Lucas is safe. Please don't look for us. I hope you find peace. She never wrote back. I never heard from her again. When I heard, years later, through an old neighbor who somehow found my number, that she had passed away quietly in her sleep, I didn't cry. I just sat on the floor and held Lucas's baby picture in my hands for hours. Sometimes grief isn't about what you lost. It's about what you never had in the first place. I think that's why I pour so much into my grandchildren now. Sophia Clara, with her wild curls and fierce little heart. Pedro Antonio, quiet like his father, but with a curiosity that lights up the whole room. They don't know my story, not yet. To them, I'm just Grandma Anna, the one who bakes too many cookies and sneaks extra candy into their backpacks. But someday, they'll want to know where we came from, who we are, and maybe then, I'll tell a version of the truth. Not all of it, but enough to let them know that strength runs in their veins. Sometimes I watch them running in the yard, chasing each other, laughing until they fall in the grass, and I think, this is the life I wanted for myself. But it's enough that they have it, that Lucas has it. I gave them a story without monsters, a home without fear, and that, to me, is redemption. Still, the silence lingers, not as loud, not as heavy, but it's there. On quiet nights, when the wind sounds too much like footsteps, when a door creaks in just the wrong way, when I hear a man's laughter that's a little too sharp, those are the moments I remember, the girl I used to be, and I whisper to her, "You made it. Anna, you got out." I don't think she always believes me, but I keep whispering anyway. I once believed the past was something you could outgrow. That time had the power to soften it, to stretch it into something less sharp. But I learned, not once, not twice, but many times over, that the past is patient, it waits, it watches, and it returns when you least expect it, often dressed in a familiar voice or an unexpected letter. It had been more than 30 years since I left Monte Claro when I received a call from an unfamiliar number. It was a Thursday morning in the fall. Lucas had stopped by with the kids on his way to work, and we had just finished pancakes with cinnamon and nutmeg, the kind Sofia Clara always asked for. The house smelled like maple syrup and warm butter. The morning sun poured through the kitchen window, and I remember thinking, this is peace. This is what peace smells like. The phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something, maybe habit, maybe intuition, made me pick up. A voice, raspy male. "Is this Anna?" My heart stopped. I hadn't heard my birth name said like that in decades. Not like that, not with that accent, not in that tone. "Yes," I said carefully, my fingers tightening around the receiver. "This is Daniel Miller. I used to live next door to your family in Monte Claro." For a second, I said nothing. The name rang a bell. A boy from my childhood, a few years older, freckles, shy smile. His mother used to bring us cornbread when we were sick. "I remember," I said finally. "I'm sorry to call out of the blue, but I thought you should know. Your brother, Raphael, he passed away 2 weeks ago." I felt the air leave my lungs like someone had punched me square in the chest. "Heart failure," he continued. "Same as your father." He gave me the date of the funeral, the location, told me some of the old neighbors asked about me, asked if I'd come. I told him no, politely, firmly. After I hung up, I stood there in the kitchen, the world spinning around me. Lucas came in, asked if everything was all right. I smiled, that automatic, rehearsed smile, and said it was just a telemarketer. He believed me, of course he did, but inside me, something had cracked open. Raphael, dead, for so many years, I had imagined that moment. I imagined it would feel like justice, like freedom, like a chapter closing, but it didn't. It felt like a door opening, and the cold air from the past rushing in. That night, after the house was quiet and the children asleep upstairs, I sat on the porch wrapped in a quilt, holding an old photograph I had kept hidden in a box for decades. It was the last picture we ever took as a family. My father, standing tall and proud, my mother, looking downward, Raphael with his hand on my shoulder, smiling like he didn't have a secret pressed into my skin, and me, 13 years old, trying to disappear into the wooden siding behind me. I stared at that photo for hours. He was gone, finally, and I was still here. The strangest thing, I didn't feel relief. I felt grief, not for him, but for the girl in that photo, for the mother who never found her voice, for the family we could have been, for everything that was stolen. I didn't go to the funeral. I didn't send flowers. I didn't call anyone back from Monte Claro. But for the next few days, I found myself drifting through old memories, like walking through a burned-down house. The structure was there, but everything inside was ash. I remembered the smell of that house, a mix of cigarette smoke and mildew. I remembered the cracked linoleum floors, the ticking clock above the stove. I remembered the silence after every scream, the apologies that never came, the prayers I whispered to a God I wasn't sure could hear me. And I remembered the first time I ever looked at Raphael and realized he would never be punished. That's when I knew I had to tell my story, not for revenge, not for closure, but for all the people who would never get either. I started writing things down, scribbles, mostly. Late at night when sleep wouldn't come, I filled notebooks with memories, fragments, details I thought I had forgotten. I wanted it all out of me, out of my body, out of my bones. And one day I looked at everything I had written and realized this was more than memory. It was survival. It was testimony. I didn't want to die with this story still inside me, because somewhere, someone is holding their breath every night, waiting for the footsteps to stop. Somewhere, a girl is wondering if she'll ever be safe again. Somewhere, a mother is hiding bruises beneath her sleeves and pretending everything's fine for the sake of her children. And maybe, just maybe, if they hear my voice, they'll believe it's possible to survive. I'm not perfect, I'm not healed, but I'm here, still standing, still speaking, still fighting, still fighting. There's a kind of scar that never touches the skin. It lives beneath it, in the muscles, in the nerves, in the way you move through the world when no one's watching. I have those scars, not just from Raphael, or from my father, but from all the years I spent believing I was less than, unworthy, small. People look at me now, gray-haired, smiling, slow in my walk, steady with my hands, and they think I've always been this calm. They don't see the years I flinched when someone raised their voice, the decades I walked into every room scanning for exits, the effort it took to speak up even just to order coffee, without apologizing first. You don't outgrow that fear. You learn to carry it, like a woman walking home at night, keys clutched in her hand like weapons, like a mother counting seconds between her baby's breaths, like someone who knows that safety is not a guarantee, but a privilege. That's what I gave Lucas. Not money, not comfort, not even a full truth, but I gave him the privilege of safety, of never having to look over his shoulder, of knowing that love would be warm and predictable, of never waking to the sound of footsteps that meant danger. He once told me years ago, before he had his own children, that he felt lucky to have had such a normal childhood. I smiled, nodded, and changed the subject. What I wanted to say was, it wasn't luck, it was war, and I fought it every single day so you wouldn't have to. But that's not something you tell your child. Not when all they see is light. There was a time, when he was a teenager, that he got angry with me. Nothing serious, just the usual teenage frustration. He wanted to go on a trip with friends, and I said no. I didn't give a reason. I couldn't. I just panicked. He called me overprotective, controlling. I remember locking myself in the bathroom after he slammed the door. I sat on the floor with my back against the cold tile, shaking. Because I knew that if I told him the truth, if I said, I'm scared something will happen to you, like it happened to me, he would never look at me the same way again. I kept quiet, let him hate me for a few days. Then made his favorite lasagna, and waited for the storm to pass. That's what trauma teaches you. How to ride out storms without drowning in them. How to keep your footing even when the ground is crumbling. How to protect people by swallowing your own truth. But that silence, it costs something. And after Raphael died, after that phone call reopened all the wounds I had stitched shut, I started thinking more and more about that cost. What happens to a story that is never told? Does it disappear, or does it poison you slowly? That's when I started recording my voice. Not for a podcast, not for the internet, just for me. I used an old tape recorder I found at a thrift shop, sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, and spoke into the plastic like I was talking to someone who already knew me, who already believed me. The first time I pressed record, my hands shook so badly I had to take 3 deep breaths before I could begin. I said, my name is Anna. I am 70 years old. I was born in Monte Claro, South Carolina, and this is what happened to me. It took me 3 hours to get through the first night. I cried, I screamed, I whispered things I never thought I'd say out loud, but I didn't stop. Every night, after the house was quiet, I'd sit down and record another memory. Sometimes the pain would come back so strong, it felt like I couldn't breathe. Other times it felt like cleaning a wound, painful, yes, but necessary. And something changed, not outside, not in the world, but inside me. I started to feel lighter, like I wasn't hiding anymore, like the truth was finally mine, not just a secret locked in my ribs. I still haven't decided what I'll do with those tapes. Maybe I'll leave them for Lucas someday, when I'm gone. Maybe I'll destroy them before that day comes. But it's not about him anymore. It's about me. It's about that girl who lived in fear for so long. It's about giving her the voice no one gave her back then. I sit here now, rocking slowly, on the porch, the sky turning a soft pink as the sun sinks behind the trees, and I think about all the scars I carry, invisible, yes, but real, and I know this much. Survival is not just about running away, it's about choosing to live, even when every part of you has been taught to hide. It's about rewriting the ending, and I'm not finished writing mine. Asterisk, I remember the first time I introduced myself as Anna Silva. It was 1973, less than a year after I arrived in Charlotte. I was applying for a second cleaning job, part-time, under the table, and the woman behind the desk asked me to fill out a form. I hesitated when I reached the box for last name. My hand hovered, and then, without really thinking, I wrote, "It's Silvadut." It was a small lie, but it felt like taking a brick off my chest, like stepping into new skin. My real last name, Ribeiro, carried too much. It was Raphael's name, my father's name, the name that made people look at me like they already knew my story, or worse, didn't care to ask. Silva was clean, neutral, a fresh start. No one asked where it came from. No one linked it to Monte Claro. It was just Anna Silva, single mother, hard worker, quiet, polite. That name gave me space to breathe, to exist on my own terms. Names matter more than people think. For so long, I was just Carlos's daughter, or Raphael's little sister. Never just Anna, never whole, never myself. And the moment I changed my name, even on paper, I felt something shift inside me. But even freedom comes with a cost. Because the lie didn't stop with my name. I built an entire story around it. When people asked about Lucas's father, I told them he'd died in a car accident. I said we'd been married young, that I wore black for a year, that we loved each other very much. It was a fantasy, sure, but not for me, for Lucas. Because I saw the way the other kids looked at him when they talked about their dads. I saw the curiosity in his eyes, the ache for something he couldn't name. So I gave him a story he could live with, that made me a liar, but it also made me a mother. The day Lucas graduated college, he stood on stage with that wide, proud grin of his. Mariana clapped so hard her hands turned red, and I cried the entire time, silently, behind my sunglasses, because I wasn't just watching my son become a man, I was watching the end of a cycle. I was watching the proof that my silence, my choices, my sacrifices, hadn't been in vain. And yet, that night, after the celebration, after the dinner and the toasts and the hugs, I came home, sat on my bed, and listened to one of the tapes I'd recorded months earlier, the one where I described the night Raphael first came into my room. Forced myself to listen, all the way through. It was agony, not because I didn't remember, but because I remembered too well, and I needed to remind myself, this is why you lied, this is why you ran, this is why you became Anna Silva, to break it, to stop it, to protect him. Mariana once asked me if I ever wanted to remarry. It was during one of our long walks through the neighborhood. The kids were still babies. She said, "You're such a good woman. Don't you get lonely, Anna?" I smiled and told her, lonely is better than broken again. She didn't press, but the truth was deeper than that. I didn't remarry because I didn't know if I could ever trust again, not fully. Antonio was kind, gentle, but even with him, I kept a part of myself locked away, not because he didn't deserve to know, but because I didn't know how to say the words without unraveling. That's what trauma does, that it teaches you to compartmentalize, to build walls where there should be windows, to protect people from the sharp edges of your past, even if it means keeping them out. But I've also learned something in these later years. Healing isn't just about tearing down walls, it's about knowing which ones to leave standing. Because some walls aren't prisons, they're boundaries, they're survival. They remind you of who you were and who you never want to be again. I've carried Anna Silva for over 50 years now, but lately, I've started to feel something unexpected, a desire to reclaim Anna Ribeiro, not because I want to return to the pain she knew, but because I want to honor the girl who survived it, the girl who stayed alive when no one helped, the girl who became a mother without guidance, a protector without armor, a survivor without applause, the girl who got on a bus with $32 and a baby in her arms and never looked back. That girl, Anna Ribeiro, is still in me. She always has been. And maybe, just maybe, I'm ready to let her speak, I think there's a moment in every survivor's life when the silence starts to feel heavier than the truth, but it doesn't happen all at once. It's slow, like a fog lifting after a long night. You don't even realize it's happening until, suddenly, you find yourself breathing deeper, looking around your life and realizing, I made it. I really made it. But then the question comes, now what? What do you do with a story that no one knows? What do you do with a truth that you buried so long ago, even you started to believe it wasn't real? That's where I found myself last year, 70 years old, sitting in this same rocking chair, sipping tea with lemon, watching Pedro Antonio try to teach his sister how to ride a bike in the front yard. The sun was soft, the grass had just been cut. Everything looked perfect. But inside me, something was turning. That quiet ache, that old familiar feeling, the one that used to keep me awake at night. But this time, it wasn't fear, it was urgency. A feeling like, if I don't tell my story now, I never will. I didn't want pity. I didn't want drama. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted the truth to exist somewhere outside of me, to breathe on its own. So I started with paper. I wrote down names, dates, places, what the house smelled like, how the floor creaked outside my bedroom, the way Raphael used to smile right before he hurt me, not with guilt, but with pride. I wrote it all, in ugly detail. There were nights I had to stop, put the pen down, breathe, wash my face, walk around the block just to remember what year it was. But I kept going. And when the notebook was full, I copied it into a letter. A long, rambling, imperfect letter, addressed to Lucas. I didn't send it, I still haven't, but I read it out loud one night. He was here, helping me with some yard work. Mariana and the kids had gone into town. We sat on the porch, drinking lemonade, laughing about some old neighbor's ridiculous backyard renovation. He looked at me with that same easy kindness he's always had and said, "You've been quiet lately, Mom. Everything okay?" And I almost said it. I opened my mouth, my throat burned, but the words didn't come. Because even now, decades later, that little girl inside me still panics when the truth gets too close to the surface. She still remembers what it felt like to be disbelieved, dismissed, diminished. So instead, I said, "I've just been thinking a lot about the past. About what I want to leave behind when I go." He smiled and squeezed my hand. "You've already left the best thing behind," he said. "You gave me everything, Mom." And I wanted to cry, because he didn't know the cost. That night, after he left, I read the letter into my recorder. I cried between paragraphs. I whispered through parts I couldn't speak aloud. And when I was done, I sat there in the dark, with the recorder still running, the red light blinking, and I said one last thing: "I forgive you, Raphael. Not because you deserve it, but because I do." I never thought I'd say those words. Never imagined I'd want to. But forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about forgetting. It's about reclaiming your power, taking back what they stole, your voice, your peace, your name. Forgiveness is for the survivor, not the abuser. It doesn't mean what happened was okay. It means I'm okay despite what happened. And that, for me, is enough. I don't know if I'll ever hand Lucas that letter. Maybe one day, maybe never. But writing it changed something in me. It let the air in. It opened a window I didn't even know was sealed shut. Now, every morning, I walk into the kitchen and feel just a little lighter. I smile more easily. I sleep more deeply. And when I pass by the mirror, I see her, that girl from Monte Claro, and she doesn't look so scared anymore. She looks older, yes, but stronger, wiser. She looks free. Asterisk. There's something about getting older that no one tells you. The world begins to slow down, but your thoughts move faster. You remember more than you used to. Not always the big things. Sometimes it's the smell of old books, the way your mother used to fold towels, the exact shade of blue in the sky the day you realized you were no longer afraid to breathe. These small details come back like whispers, and they're louder than you expect. Now, at 70, I've learned to appreciate the quiet rhythm of ordinary days. I wake early, make coffee strong, just the way I like it, feed the birds out back, listen to the creaking of this house that's seen my entire second life unfold. This home given to me by Antonio, the man who never asked questions he didn't need answered, is filled with memories that don't hurt. Laughter in the kitchen, scraped knees patched up with band-aids and kisses, Sunday dinners with too many mashed potatoes and not enough room at the table. Real memories, earned joy. Most people don't realize how radical it is to live a quiet life after trauma. To raise a child without shouting. To sleep without locking your bedroom door. To walk through your own front door and feel safe. But that, more than anything, is my definition of healing. It's not about erasing the past. It's about choosing, every day, not to let it define your future. The neighbors here know me as Miss Anna. I bake cookies for the children next door. I knit hats for the winter shelter downtown. I read books to toddlers at the library on Tuesday mornings. To them, I'm just a sweet old lady with silver hair and good banana bread. They don't know the storms I've weathered, the nights I didn't sleep, the mornings I woke up with a scream lodged in my throat, and I don't need them to know. Because survival doesn't always need to be visible. Sometimes, it's enough just to be, but every so often, someone comes along who sees something more. A few months ago, a young woman moved in, 2 houses down. Emily, 26, single, quiet, works at the pharmacy. I noticed her right away because she always seemed so careful, like she was bracing for impact, even in simple conversations. One afternoon, I caught her standing on her porch with red eyes and trembling hands. She was trying to light a cigarette but couldn't stop shaking. I didn't say much, just walked over and asked if she liked sweet tea. She looked at me like I was speaking a different language, but then she nodded. I brought 2 glasses. We sat on her steps in silence. Eventually, she said, "I don't know how to talk to people like you. You seem so calm." I smiled, and for the first time in a long time, I told someone I wasn't always this way. She didn't ask for more, but a week later, she brought me a small potted plant. Said it reminded her of me, quiet, resilient, growing where no one expected it to. We've had tea 3 more times since. I don't ask her questions she isn't ready to answer. She doesn't know the full truth of my life, but there's a silent understanding between us now. The kind that passes between survivors without words. That's what I've learned about pain. Once you've walked through it, you recognize it in others, no matter how hard they try to hide it, and you also recognize strength. The kind of strength that doesn't need applause, that shows up in the way a person gets out of bed when it would be easier to stay under the covers, in the way someone chooses to be kind, even when the world hasn't been kind to them. That's the kind of strength I see in myself now. It took me decades to find her, this version of Anna, who isn't always looking over her shoulder, this woman who plants flowers instead of running from ghosts, this grandmother who builds a new legacy with each bedtime story, each batch of cookies, each soft-spoken truth. I may not have had a peaceful beginning, but I'm damn sure making my ending one. There are moments now, rare, quiet ones, when I catch myself smiling for no reason. Not a polite smile, not a smile for someone else, but a smile that comes from deep inside, like a secret I've kept for too long, finally made its way to the surface. Those are the moments I know I've become someone I never thought I'd be. Whole, not perfect, not untouched, but whole. I used to believe that healing meant going back to who I was before the pain. But I see now that girl doesn't exist anymore. She couldn't survive what I did. So I became someone else. And maybe that's the most powerful thing we can do, not return to what was, but build something new from what's left. When I was a little girl, I used to wish someone would come and save me. I imagined a teacher, a neighbor, a friend's parent, anyone who would look into my eyes and say, "I see you. I know something's wrong, I'll help you." But no one ever did. That kind of neglect doesn't just hurt, it teaches you something dangerous. It teaches you that your pain doesn't matter, that silence is safer, that love has conditions. It's taken me a lifetime to unlearn that, but now, when I see a child walking to school alone, or a woman crying in her car outside the grocery store, or a young man with hollow eyes and clenched fists, I don't look away, because I remember what it's like to be invisible. And now, I choose to see. I choose to be the woman I needed when I was a girl. I started volunteering last year at a community center here in Charlotte. It's nothing big, just a few hours a week. I help with writing workshops for women over 50. Many of them are widows. Some are newly divorced. A few, like me, are survivors of things we don't always name out loud. We sit in a circle, sip coffee, and write. Not essays. Not stories for the world. Just truth. Sometimes it's hard. The room gets quiet. Tears flow. But there's power in saying, "This happened to me." And power, too, in hearing someone else say, "Me too." One woman, her name is Charlene, told me last week that writing about her past helped her sleep through the night for the first time in years. Another, Martha, said she finally called her sister after 20 years of silence. We're not healing each other. We're reminding each other we can heal ourselves. And maybe that's what makes this part of my life so full. Not because the pain is gone, but because I'm not carrying it alone anymore. There's a strange beauty in becoming the person your younger self prayed for. It's not loud. It doesn't come with applause or awards, but it's steady, like the way the trees Outside sway in the wind but never fall, like the way my granddaughter reaches for my hand when we cross the street, trusting that I'll keep her safe, and knowing now, for certain, that I will. That's what keeps me going. Not just survival, but legacy. A legacy of truth, of care, of not pretending anymore. Because here's what I've learned. After 70 years of breathing through storms, survival is not enough. We deserve joy. We deserve softness. We deserve to be believed. And when the world doesn't give us those things, we give them to each other. That's why I tell my story. Not because I want pity, but because I want the next woman, the next girl, the next frightened soul sitting in silence, to know that silence doesn't have to last forever, and neither does fear. We get to change, we get to grow, we get to begin again. Even at 70, even with all the years behind us, we still have stories to tell. Asterisk sometimes, when I'm holding Pedro Antonio in my lap and he falls asleep against my chest, I wonder what he'll remember about me. Will he remember my laugh, my stories, the way I make his favorite peach cobbler from scratch? Or will he remember how I always held him a little tighter than necessary, as if the world might try to take him to— He's only 5, but he's observant like his father. One day, I was rubbing my knees and wincing arthritis, creeping in, as it does, and he looked up at me and said, "Grandma, is your heart hurting too?" I smiled and said no, but the truth is, it was. It still does, because I've lived a life full of love. Yes, but also one full of things I've never said out loud. So much of my story has been kept behind a locked door. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I didn't want it to infect the people I loved. One spent years building a life made of peace, and I was terrified that opening the past would tear holes in everything I'd built. And yet, the past doesn't stay quiet forever. Not really. It leaks out in the way I overpack Sofia Clara's school bag, in the way I check the locks twice at night, in the way I wake up gasping from dreams I don't talk about. I've been writing more letters lately, not to send, just to write. Letters to Raphael, to my father, to my mother, to the girl I used to be. And sometimes, letters to Lucas. They all start the same way. There are things I never told you, not because you didn't deserve to know, but because I wasn't ready to say them. I write them by hand, in cursive that's getting shakier every year, and keep them in a small box beneath my bed. I don't know if anyone will ever read them, but writing them helps. There's one letter that I open and reread every month, the one to my younger self. It says, "You made it. I'm so proud of you. You kept breathing even when everything told you to stop. You protected your baby. You found love. You lived. And now you're safe. You're really safe." Some days I don't believe it. Other days, I cling to it like scripture. Mariana once found me crying in the kitchen. It was late, after everyone had gone to sleep. I had burned the cornbread of all things, and the smell of smoke brought back something I didn't expect. I stood there, frozen, holding the blackened pan, and she walked in and just held me. Didn't ask, didn't press. She just stayed, and later that night, she left a note on my nightstand that said, "You don't have to tell me, but I believe you." It broke something open in me, because that's all I ever wanted, even as a little girl, to be believed. You'd be amazed how many women walk through their entire lives never hearing those words. How many carry their truth in silence because someone told them they were being dramatic, or difficult, or lying. I don't want that for the women who come after me. I don't want that for Sofia Clara. She's already strong, brave, fierce in ways I never was at her age. She asks hard questions. She speaks her mind. She doesn't flinch when adults raise their voices, and I thank God every day that her world is different from the one I was raised in. But still, I watch her carefully. I ask her how she feels. Remind her that no one has the right to hurt her, or touch her, or make her feel small. And I do it all without telling her why I know these things so well. Because, for now, her world is light, and I want it to stay that way as long as possible. But when the day comes that she asks who I really am, not just Grandma Anna, but the woman beneath the sweaters and baked goods, I will tell her, not everything, but enough. Enough for her to know that strength is not the absence of pain, it's what you build in the ruins. That forgiveness is not weakness. It's choosing not to let your past decide your future. That survival isn't shameful, it's sacred. And that her grandmother lived a life that was stolen, reclaimed, and finally, fully her own. My home isn't big, just 3 bedrooms, a kitchen that smells like cinnamon most days, and a porch that's held more secrets than I can count. But tucked away in the back, down a short hallway with creaky floorboards, is a room I call the memory room. It started as a guest room, then a storage space, but over the years, it's become something else entirely. The walls are lined with shelves, not of books, but of boxes, each one labeled by decade. Inside are fragments of a life I used to hide, old journals, photographs, hospital records, drawings Lucas made when he was 5, and letters I never sent. It's quiet in there. Always, the light filters through lace curtains. My mother once gave me one of the few things I kept from that house in Monte Claro. They're yellowed now, frayed around the edges, but I keep them, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder of how far I've come. Some days, I sit in that room and just exist. I let the silence wrap around me like a blanket. I hold the letters I wrote in my 30s, when I was too afraid to speak and too angry to cry. I read the journal entries from the nights Lucas was sick and I sat up, rocking him and whispering promises into the dark. I open a small velvet pouch that holds the first baby sock he ever wore, the only thing I took with me from that life before. There's something sacred about preserving pain in a way that no longer consumes you. Used to think talking about it would make it worse, but silence was heavier. This room, this tiny, private sanctuary, has become a place where I can be honest without fear. Where I'm not someone's mother, or grandmother, or neighbor. Where I'm just Anna. Not Anna Silva, not Anna Ribera, just Anna, the woman who lived through it, and lived beyond it. I don't bring anyone into this room, not even Lucas, especially not Lucas. Some truths aren't meant to be shared in full. They're meant to be honored, witnessed, held like fragile glass, not tossed into conversation like ordinary things. I know there will come a day when this house no longer holds me, when my grandchildren will walk through these halls with soft steps, touching the furniture like it's an echo, and I wonder, what will they find? Will they open the boxes? Will they listen to the tapes? Will they sit in the chair I sit in now, feeling the weight of a woman they thought they knew? I don't know, but I hope, more than anything, they'll understand one thing, that healing isn't pretty, it's messy, long, personal, and worth it. Every time I wrote something down, every time I whispered into that recorder, every time I scribbled another memory on the back of an envelope at 2 in the morning, I was choosing to live. Even now, I find myself surprised by how much I remember, not just the bad, but the moments of resistance. The day I said no to Raphael for the first time and locked my bedroom door. The way my hand shook when I bought that bus ticket. The tears in my eyes when I first held Lucas and felt love, not fear. These memories matter. They are not just footnotes in someone else's cruelty. They are chapters of survival. And in this room, surrounded by the paper trail of my pain and strength, I let myself feel pride. It's a quiet pride. Not loud, not public, but deep, and honest, because even if no one ever reads these letters, or listens to those tapes, or opens these boxes, I know what they mean. They mean I didn't vanish. I didn't disappear into the silence they forced on me. I spoke, I wrote, I remembered, and I gave myself the closure the world never offered. That to me is peace. I've never been afraid of dying. That might sound strange coming from someone who's fought so hard to live, but it's true. I don't fear death. I fear being forgotten. I fear leaving this world without having truly been known. There were decades in my life where I was alive in body, but absent in spirit, just going through the motions, surviving each day like it was a battlefield. And back then, I thought death would come for me quietly, without warning, like a thief in the night. Now, I think if it came tomorrow, I'd meet it at the door with calm hands and an open heart. Not because I want to leave, but because I know I've lived, not just existed, lived. I've loved with all the strength I had left after the worst kind of betrayal. I raised a boy into a man who walks through this world with gentleness, not because he had to fight to survive, but because he was allowed to grow safely. I built a home where laughter echoes louder than fear ever did. That to me is a kind of immortality, the kind that doesn't need plaques or photos or family trees, just the quiet continuation of kindness. But still, I think about the end, not in a morbid way, in a practical one. Last month, I sat down with Mariana and showed her my will, told her where the keys are, which bank holds the safety deposit box, where the letters are stored, not the memory room ones. Those are for Lucas. If he ever chooses to open that door, but the logistical things, the responsible things. She cried. I didn't. Because I wasn't saying goodbye, I was saying, I've got you, even when I'm gone. That's what we do, isn't it? As mothers, as grandmothers, as women. We prepare. We leave behind instructions, and wisdom, and casseroles in the freezer. And if we're lucky, we leave behind more than that, a way of living, a way of loving, a way of forgiving. Sometimes I sit at the window and watch the wind move through the oak trees in the yard. I planted those trees with Antonio in 1980. They were barely sticks then. Now they tower above the house, strong, rooted, unshaken by the storms. I like to think I've become a little like them, older, weathered, but not broken. The other day, Sophia Clara asked me, Grandma, do you think we go somewhere after we die? I paused before answering, not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to honor her curiosity. I think, I said, that we leave pieces of ourselves in the people we love, and in the good we do, and in the stories we tell, and that's a kind of forever. She nodded, and then she said, then you'll be with me forever. I hope so, because even though I've spent most of my life hiding my past, what I gave to this family, what I chose to build out of the ashes, that's what I hope lasts. Not the pain. The strength, not the silence, the truth, and not the fear, the love. People used to look at me and say, you're so strong, and I hated it because strength, when it's forced on you, doesn't feel noble. It feels like a burden, like you've been given no other option. But now, when people say it, I take a breath and let it in, because my strength doesn't come from what I endured, it comes from what I chose to become anyway. A woman who cooks too much, who listens more than she speaks, who writes letters in the dark and sings lullabies that no one taught her. A woman who gave birth to a boy she was told to hate, and loved him anyway. A woman who said no more, and got on a bus. Who made a life, who stayed alive. Who tells the truth. And if death is coming, I will not run. I will sit on this porch with a blanket in my lap, a cup of tea in my hand, and I will wait with the same stillness I once used to survive the night. Only this time, there will be no fear in my heart, only gratitude, gratitude. As I've gotten older, I've come to understand that not every woman who suffers survives, and not every woman who survives gets the chance to speak. Some never make it out. Some die in silence, their stories buried with them. Others survive, but with so many scars that they never feel safe enough to name what happened. I think about those women a lot. Women like my mother, women like the neighbor I had growing up, Mrs. Crowley, who always wore long sleeves even in July, and smiled too brightly when her husband passed by. Women like the teenage girls I saw at church, whose eyes were always a little too old, who never raised their hands in class, who flinched at loud noises and didn't know how to explain why. Some of them are gone now. Others are still alive, maybe sitting right now at their kitchen tables, staring out the window, wondering if it's too late to speak. This part of my life, this season, it feels like a gift I never expected to receive. The gift of time, of space, of voice, and I've made a decision. I want to use what's left of my time to speak for the ones who never could. Not by standing on stages or writing books or doing interviews. That's not me. But by being the kind of woman other women feel safe with, by saying the quiet things out loud in small rooms where ears and hearts are open, by telling the truth, not all at once, not always with names, but enough to light a path for someone else who's still lost in the dark. Last month, I visited a women's shelter in the city. I wasn't planning to talk, just donate some blankets and drop off a few home-cooked meals. But then I sat down with one of the younger staff members, maybe 30 years old, kind-faced, soft voice, and she asked me why I cared so much, and something in me broke open. Told her more than I've ever told a stranger. About the town I came from. About the brother I never forgave, but learned to let go of. About the son I raised with more love than I thought I had in me. And when I was done, she just looked at me and said, would you consider speaking to the women here? You don't have to share details. Just be present. Let them see what survival looks like on the other side. I said yes. I didn't sleep for 2 nights after that, not because I was afraid of what I'd say, but because I was afraid of what I'd feel. But when the day came, I stood in front of a circle of 8 women, all different ages, all holding cups of tea like lifelines, and I said, my name is Anna, I'm 70 years old, and I've walked through fire. That was it. That was all it took. One woman, her name was Patrice, started crying. Another, Maria, came up to me afterward and said, "I didn't know I could still have a future." That's when I knew, this isn't just my story anymore. It belongs to every woman who thought she had to stay quiet, every girl who never got the chance to grow up without fear, every mother who looked at her child and promised them a better life without knowing if she could deliver. We all carry each other's stories. Whether we realize it or not, we carry them in the way we touch someone's arm gently when they flinch, in the way we open a door for someone with shaking hands, in the way we say, "I believe you," and mean it. I am not a therapist. I am not a savior. I am not special. But I am proof. Proof that survival is possible, that healing is possible, that it's never too late to speak, even if your voice shakes, even if your hands tremble, even if you're 70 years old and have lived half your life hiding the truth, you can still tell it. And when you do, someone else might find the courage to tell theirs. That's what I want to leave behind more than anything. Not just memories, but momentum. Not just history, but hope. Asterisk, they say that putting something into words gives it shape, that pain spoken out loud becomes something you can hold, and if you can hold it, you can choose to set it down. I used to think that was nonsense. What words could possibly undo what was done? But I was wrong, because speaking my truth first, to myself, then into a recorder, then slowly to others, didn't undo the past. It didn't make the pain disappear, but it did something just as powerful. It gave the pain a place to live outside my body, and that changed everything. For so many years, the memories lived inside me, tightening my chest, turning my stomach, stealing my sleep. I would walk through the grocery store and suddenly smell a man's cologne that sent me into a spiral. I'd hear a child cry in just the right tone, and it would rip open something I thought I had buried. But once I started putting the memories into words, ugly, honest, trembling words, they lost their grip on me. I didn't have to keep them locked up anymore. I wrote them into notebooks. I spoke them into tapes. I stitched them into letters and folded them into drawers I no longer feared opening. And slowly, I began to feel something I hadn't in decades. Lightness, not joy. Not at first, just the absence of constant weight. It was like stepping out of a storm you didn't even realize you'd been standing in your whole life. I remember the exact moment I realized the story was no longer holding me hostage. It was a warm spring afternoon. The cherry trees in my front yard were blooming, full of those soft pink petals that fall like feathers when the wind blows just right. I was sweeping the porch, same as always, when a girl from the neighborhood walked by. Her name is Jamie, 16, quiet eyes too sharp for her age. She waved, I waved back, then she stopped. She turned, walked up to my gate, and said, "Miss Anna, can I ask you something?" I nodded, double quotes. What do you do when someone hurts you, but nobody believes you? The question hit me like lightning. I leaned on the broom and looked her in the eyes, and without thinking, I said, "You tell your story anyway." She blinked. "Even if it doesn't change anything." I nodded again, especially then. She didn't cry. She didn't explain. She just said, "Thank you," and walked away, and I stood there, trembling, because I knew that was it. That was the moment. The reason. All of it. The years of silence, the fear, the writing, the tapes. It wasn't just for me anymore. It was for her, and for every girl like her. I went inside, pulled out a fresh notebook, and wrote on the first page, "The story that set me free might one day set someone else free too." From that day on, I stopped hiding from the idea that my voice could matter. I don't mean in a grand, world-changing way. I'm not trying to be famous. I'm not chasing applause. But I know what it means to feel invisible. And I've learned how powerful it is to say, "This happened to me," and watch someone else realize they're not alone. It doesn't take away the pain, but it takes away the isolation. And that can be life-saving. These days, I leave my tapes labeled. I've organized my notebooks. I've even started typing some of the clearest memories, not for publication, just for permanence, because ink fades, but truth doesn't. I want Lucas to know, one day, that his mother didn't just survive, she turned her scars into seeds. I want Sofia Clara and Pedro Antonio to grow up knowing that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's found in whispers, in the act of telling the truth, even when your voice shakes. And I want whoever finds this story, however they find it, to know, you're not weak because you were hurt, you're not broken because you've been quiet, and you're not alone, not anymore, not anymore. Sometimes I wonder what people will say about me when I'm gone. Not in the grand sense, I'm not expecting statues or speeches, but in the small, quiet conversations, at the dinner table, on the porch, in the way my grandchildren talk about me when they're grown. I hope they say I was kind. I hope they remember the smell of my apple pie in the oven and the sound of my humming in the kitchen when I thought no one was listening. I hope they remember how I always had time for a scraped knee, a broken heart, a long story with no clear ending, because time was something I was once robbed of. And now, I try to give it freely. What I don't need them to remember is the pain I carried. Not in detail, not in the dark shapes it took. What matters most to me now is not what I lived through, but what I did with it. I want them to know that I chose love, even when I had every reason to shut down, that I chose to build something gentle out of a past that was violent, that I didn't pass on the pain, I passed on peace. That, to me, is legacy. Not wealth, not houses, not heirlooms. But peace. If there's one thing I wish for every woman who's lived in silence, it's this: that she finds a life where she no longer flinches at kindness, that she learns to receive love without suspicion, that she can sit in the sun with her eyes closed and feel safe in her own skin. Because I remember the years I didn't feel that, the years I slept with my back to the wall, waiting for the door to creak open, the years I walked with my eyes down, always bracing for impact. The years I hated mirrors. I don't hate them anymore now. When I pass by a mirror, I stop, I look and I say, quietly, you made it. I'm not beautiful by the world's standards. My skin is soft in places it once was firm. My hair is silver and fraying. My hands are marked with age, with stories, with labor. But when I look at myself, I don't see damage. I see endurance. I see a woman who could have turned hard, but chose to stay soft. A woman who buried the worst kind of secrets and still managed to raise laughter in her kitchen. A woman who never said I love you growing up, but says it now every chance she gets because she learned the way that people don't always stay, and love should never be assumed, it should be spoken. So I say it. I say it to my grandchildren when they leave for school. I say it to Lucas when he hangs up the phone. I even say it to myself now. Sometimes, I love you, Anna. You did good. That was the hardest one to learn. To love myself. Not the idea of myself, not the version I became for others, but the broken, real, unfiltered me, because I've learned something simple but revolutionary. You don't have to be healed to be whole. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy. You just have to keep going, to choose over and over again, to be more than what happened to you. That's what I did. That's what I hope they remember, not the tears, not the years I lost, but the life I made after. The garden I planted where there was once only ash. The quiet I filled with song. The house I turned into a home, and the woman who stood on her own feet and said, no more. I used to think peace was a place, a house in the country, a beach with no footprints, a small town where nothing ever changed, somewhere quiet, untouched by what had happened to me. But now I understand, peace isn't a place you run to. It's a place you build inside yourself, and I've built mine brick by brick. Not perfectly, not quickly, but intentionally. It started the first time I said no to Raphael. Then again, the day I stepped onto that bus with Lucas wrapped in a quilt. Then again when I unpacked in Charlotte, when I bought curtains for our new room, when I cooked our first meal, when I dared to believe we could stay. Each of those moments, simple, maybe even small, was a stone in the foundation of the life I have now, a life I built with tired hands and an aching heart, but a heart that refused to give up, a heart that kept beating, even when I didn't want to wake up. And now, this heart feels calm, not because the world has changed, but because I have. I look around this house, and I see stories in every corner. The bookshelf, Lucas built when he was 16 and wanted to prove he could use a hammer. The quilt I made from pieces of my old dresses, patched with care during sleepless nights. The dent in the kitchen wall from the time Pedro threw a ball indoors, and I pretended to be mad but laughed until I cried. These aren't just objects, they're proof that healing leaves behind beauty too. That our lives aren't just measured by what we escape, but by what we created in spite of it. I sit on this porch now, the same one I once feared would be my only escape, and I don't feel trapped. I feel free. The sky above me stretches wide. The cicadas hum their low summer song. The wind moves gently through the trees Antonio and I planted so long ago, and I think, this is enough, this breath, this day, this peace. It took me so long to believe I deserved it, but I do, not because I survived, though that matters, but because I chose to live differently after surviving, to raise a child in love, not fear. To protect without controlling, to nurture without secrets. To guide without silence. Lucas doesn't know everything about me, but he knows enough to know he was cherished. He knows that I never let the past decide the shape of his life. He knows I gave him everything I had, and then some. And now, I watch him raise his children with gentleness. He talks to them, really talks. He listens, even when they're messy and loud and stubborn. And when I see that, when I watch him kneel down to meet his daughter's eyes, instead of shouting over her, I know, the cycle ended with me. That's what I fought for. That's what I ran for. Not justice, not vengeance, but interruption. A break in the chain, a new beginning, born from the ashes of my own. And so now, when the sun dips low and the air turns cool, I breathe in and exhale all the things I used to carry, the fear, the shame. The silence. I let them go. I let them float out across the yard, into the trees, into the sky, and I whisper, not to anyone in particular, maybe just to the air itself, I'm not afraid anymore. I never thought I'd tell this story, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't believe anyone would listen. I was a child when I learned to disappear, a girl when I learned silence was safer than truth, a young mother when I learned that pain can live inside love, and that sometimes surviving means carrying both at once. And now I'm an old woman, and I've found my voice, not a loud voice, not a perfect one, but mine, and that is no small thing. This story, my story, was never meant to be a confession. It's not a tragedy. It's not a fairy tale either. It's a life, messy, complicated, and beautifully unfinished. It's the life of a girl who was hurt, a woman who ran, a mother who protected, and a grandmother who sat on her porch and decided to speak. I want whoever's hearing this, whether it's through a screen, a speaker, or read aloud in someone's quiet room, to know this truth. You matter, even if no one believed you, even if you never said it out loud, even if the world tried to erase your name, your voice, your worth. You are still here. You are still breathing. And that means there is time. Time to heal. Time to speak. Time to build something beautiful from what you've survived. I'm not ashamed anymore, not of what happened, not of how long it took me to tell it, not of the ways I've fallen short, or the years I lost, or the people I couldn't save. Shame belongs to the ones who hurt, but grace belongs to the ones who live anyway. And I have lived awfully, even when it was hard, even when it hurt, even when the world told me not to. I've lived in the quiet smiles of my grandchildren, in the handwritten notes folded into lunchboxes, in the way Lucas hugs his children with both arms, like he's holding the world. I've lived in the cinnamon I sprinkle in every cake, in the stitched corners of the baby blankets I make for the shelter, in the stories I now tell with trembling hands and a steady heart. If you take anything from this story, let it be this: there is always a way forward, not always quickly, not always easily, but there is a way. I know this because I found mine. From Monte Claro, South Carolina, to Charlotte, from silence, to voice, from pain, to peace. And now, I pass that peace on to you, whoever you are, wherever you are. If you are still in the dark, know this: the light may be far, but it is not gone. You are not broken beyond repair. You are not unworthy of love. You are not alone. You are becoming, just like I did, just like we all are. And maybe, just maybe, the telling of this story will plant something in you, a seed of courage, of clarity, of hope. And maybe one day, you'll sit where I am now, in the stillness of your own becoming, and say, I made it, and I'm not afraid anymore.